Winter and Summer Paralympic Games, which since the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, have been held shortly after the corresponding Olympic Games. All Paralympic Games are governed by the International Paralympic Committee (IPC). The Paralympics started in 1948 as a small event for British World War II veterans, initiated by Dr. Antonio Maglio to promote rehabilitation through sports. The movement quickly expanded, and by the 1960 Games in Rome, 400 athletes with disabilities from 23 countries participated. Today, the Paralympics has become one of the largest international sporting events, with the 2020 Summer Paralympics hosting 4,520 athletes from 163 national Paralympic committees. Despite its significant growth, Paralympians still face challenges, particularly in funding, where a notable disparity persists compared to non-disabled Olympic athletes. The Paralympic Games are organized in parallel with and in a similar way to the Olympic Games. The IOC recognized Special Olympics World Games include athletes with intellectual disabilities, although since 1992, people with intellectual disabilities also participate in the Paralympic Games, and the Deaflympics held since 1924 are exclusive for deaf athletes. Given the wide variety of disabilities of para-athletes, there are several categories in which they compete. The allowable disabilities are divided into 10 eligible impairment types: impaired muscle power, impaired passive range of movement, limb deficiency, leg length difference, short stature, hypertonia, ataxia, athetosis, vision impairment, and intellectual impairment. These categories are further divided into various subcategories. Foreigners, athletes with disabilities at the Olympic Games. Athletes with disabilities did compete at the Olympic Games prior to the advent of the Paralympics. First athlete to do so was German-American gymnast George Azer in 1904, who had one artificial leg. Oliver Halassi, a Hungarian amputee water polo player, competed in 3 successive Olympic Games. Beginning in 1928, 6 Hungarian Karoli Takics competed in shooting events in both the 1948 and 1950 Summer Olympics. He was a right-arm amputee and could shoot left-handed. Another athlete with a disability who appeared in the Olympics prior to the Paralympic Games was Liz Hartl, a Danish equestrian athlete who had contracted polio in 1943 and won a silver medal in the dressage event in the 1950 Summer Olympics. 7. Stoke Mandeville Games, the first organized athletic event for athletes with disabilities that coincided with the Olympic Games, took place on the day of the opening of the 1948 Summer Olympics in London. The German Jewish doctor Ludwig Gutmann of Stoke Mandeville Hospital, who had fled Nazi Germany with the help of the Council for Assisting Refugee Academics (CARA) in 1939, hosted a sports competition for British World War II veteran patients with spinal cord injuries. The first games were called the 1948 International Wheelchair Games and were intended to coincide with the 1948 Olympics. Gutmann's aim was to create an elite sports competition for people with disabilities that would be equivalent to the Olympic Games. The Games were held at the same location each year, and in 1950 the Dutch and Israeli veterans took part alongside the British, making it the first international competition of its own kind. In 1960, the 9th annual Games took place outside of the UK for the first time in Rome, to coincide with the 1960 Summer Olympics, which were also being held in Rome. These were to be later designated the first Paralympic Games. These early competitions have been described as the precursors of the Paralympic Games, and Stoke Mandeville holds holds a similar place in the lore of the Paralympic movement as Greece holds in the Olympic Games. Since 2012, the Paralympic flame has incorporated a heritage flame lit at Stoke Mandeville, although it was combined with flames lit in the host country for the formal start of the torch relay. Beginning in 2024, future Paralympic torch relays will officially begin in Stoke Mandeville as an equivalent to the Olympic flame being created in Olympia. Winter Games. The first Winter Paralympic Games were held in 1976 in Grundskolsvik, Sweden. This was the first Paralympics in which multiple categories of athletes with disabilities could compete. 17. The Winter Games were celebrated every 4 years on the same year as their summer counterpart, just as the Olympics were. This tradition was upheld through the 1990 Games in Albertville, France. Beginning with the 1994 Games, the Winter Paralympics and the Winter Olympics have been held in those even-numbered years separate from the Summer Olympics. The Winter Games happened 2 years after the Summer Games. Name and symbols. Although the name was originally coined as a portmanteau combining paraplegic due to its origins as games for people with spinal injuries and Olympic 30, the inclusion of other disability groups meant that this was no longer considered very accurate. The present formal explanation for the name is that it derives from the Greek preposition by alpha rho y, para beside or alongside, and thus refers to a competition held in parallel with the Olympic Games. The Summer Games of 1988 held in Seoul was the first time the term Paralympic came into official use. Spirit in motion is the current motto for the Paralympic movement. Current Paralympic flag is used since 2020 and contains 3 colors, red, blue, and green, which are the colors most widely represented in the flags of nations. Colors are each in the shape of an adjective, which is Latin for I move. I shake, I stir, which is the name given to an asymmetrical crescent specially designed for the Paralympic movement. The 3 adjectives circle a central point, which is a symbol for the athletes congregating from all points of the globe. 32. The motto and symbol of the IPC were changed in 2003 to their current versions. The change was intended to convey the idea that Paralympians have a spirit of competition and that the IPC as an organization realizes its potential and is moving forward to achieve it. The vision of the IPC is to enable Paralympic athletes to achieve sporting excellence and to inspire and excite the world. The Paralympic anthem is Hymn-to-Lavnir, or Anthem of the Future. It was composed by Thierry Darnis and adopted as the official anthem in March 1996. Down syndrome participation. Within the framework of the International Olympic Committee's commitment to equal access to athletics, concerns have been raised regarding inclusion of athletes with Down syndrome in the Paralympic Games. While the Paralympic movement strives for inclusivity, the absence of a specific classification for athletes with Down syndrome within Paralympic swimming events raises questions about equal and fair competition for Down syndrome athletes. International Paralympic Committee para-swimming classification codes are based upon single impairment only, whereas Down syndrome individuals have both physical and intellectual impairments. Although swimmers with Down syndrome are able to compete in the S14 intellectual impairment category provided they score low on IQ tests, they are often outmatched by the superior physicality of their opponents. At present, there is no designated Paralympic category for swimmers with Down syndrome, meaning they have to compete as intellectually disadvantaged athletes. This disregards their physical disabilities. A number of advocacy groups globally have been lobbying for the inclusion of a distinct classification category for Down syndrome swimmers within the IPC classification codes framework. 72 initiatives aim at promoting greater inclusion inclusivity within the Paralympic movement have emerged, including advocacy and awareness-raising efforts targeting discrimination and ensuring equal opportunities for athletes with Down syndrome. Despite ongoing advocacy, the issue remains unresolved, and swimmers with Down syndrome continue to face challenges in accessing appropriate classification pathways. Classification: the International Paralympic Committee (IPC) has established 10 disability categories. Athletes are divided within each category according to the level of impairment in a functional classification system which differs from sport to sport. Categories: the IPC has established 10 disability categories, including physical, visual, and intellectual impairment. Athletes with one of these disabilities can compete in the Paralympics, though not every sport can allow for every disability category. These categories apply to both summer and winter Paralympics. Physical impairment: there are 8 different types of physical impairment. Impaired muscle power: with impairments in this category, the force generated by muscles such as the muscles of one limb, one side of the body, or the lower half of the body is reduced. For example, spinal cord injury, spina bifida, post-polio syndrome. Impaired passive range of movement: the range of movement in one or more joints is reduced in a systematic way. Acute conditions such as arthritis are not included. Loss of limb or limb deficiency: the total or partial absence of bones or joints from partial or total loss due to illness, trauma, or congenital limb deficiency, for example, dysmelia. Leg length difference: significant bone shortening occurs in one leg due to congenital deficiency or trauma. Short stature: standing height is reduced due to shortened legs, arms, and trunk, which are due to a musculoskeletal deficit of bone or cartilage structures. For example, achondroplasia, growth hormone deficiency, osteogenesis imperfecta. Hypertonia: hypertonia is marked by an abnormal increase in muscle tension and reduced ability of a muscle to stretch. Hypertonia may result from injury, disease, or conditions which involve damage to the central nervous system, for example, cerebral palsy. Ataxia: ataxia is an impairment that consists of a lack of coordination of muscle movements, for example, cerebral palsy, Friedreich's ataxia, multiple sclerosis. Athetosis: athetosis is generally characterized by unbalanced, involuntary movements and a difficulty maintaining a symmetrical posture, for example, cerebral palsy, choreoathetosis. Visual impairment: athletes with visual impairment ranging from partial vision sufficient to be judged legally blind to total blindness. This includes impairment of one or more component of the visual system by structure, receptors, optic nerve pathway, and visual cortex. The sighted guides for athletes with a visual impairment are such a close and essential part of the competition that the athlete with visual impairment and the guide are considered a team. Beginning in 2012, these guides, along with sighted goalkeepers in five-a-side football, became eligible to receive medals of their own. Intellectual disability: athletes with a significant intellectual impairment and associated limitations in adaptive behavior. The IPC primarily serves athletes with physical disabilities, but the disability group intellectual disability has been added to some Paralympic Games. This includes only elite athletes with intellectual disabilities diagnosed before the age of 18. However, the IOC recognized Special Olympics World Games are open to all people with intellectual disabilities. Notable champions and achievements: Tricia Zorn of the United States is the most decorated Paralympian in history. She competed in the blind swimming events and won a total of 55 medals, 41 of which are gold. Her Paralympic career spanned 24 years from 1980 to 2004. She was also an alternate on the 1980 the Winter Paralympic Games, competing in a variety of events between 1988 and 2002. She won a total of 22 medals, of which 17 were gold. After winning 5 gold medals at the 2000 Games, she retired at the age of 58. Narrowly Fairhall, a paraplegic archer from New Zealand, was the first paraplegic competitor and the third Paralympian to participate in the Olympic Games when she competed in the 1980 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. She placed 34th in the Olympic archery competition and won a Paralympic gold medal in the same event. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the little bell to get notifications for new ASMR narration videos. See you in the next one.